Hello everybody, this is History Time and I'm hoping that we learn. Now just recently I did a video in regards to the same subject and people are asking me if I could do another video, and I try to research those professionals who talks about these topics, and I understand different people, different professionals have their different understanding in regards to this topic, and this is one of the most difficult topics because everyone believes in what they believe, but at the end of the day I'm here to give people with different opinions who are sharing, who are really these people that we want to know. Like the question of who are really Jews is a question that most of people have been asking, and this video will try to elaborate to one or two, three things. Now, there are key points that I have to make even before jumping right into the video because it's important for me to give you a context. Now, these are opinions of people. They might not be accurate from what you know, or they might sometimes say things that you don't agree with. But the essence of this video is for us all to learn and take what you can take and leave what you feel you cannot take. First, there are a couple of questions that I'll love to ask my audience just before jumping right into video. 92% of people are claiming to be Jews are not the real Jews, especially people who are claiming to be Jews are the people that we call the Ashkenazi Jews, and I've been talking about them in this channel. Now, there are two theories of who are Ashkenazi Jews. Now, some people will say that Ashkenazi Jews are those whose ancestors lived in Europe, particularly in regions like Germany, Poland, and Russia. Now, they make up a large population of Jewish population today, particularly in Western nations like the US and Israel. Now, if they form the large majority of the Jews, now again the question is, who are the true Jews? Now, there are two theories that explains this. One, we have genetic studies that confirms that Ashkenazi Jews are significant ancestry to the Eastern, to the Middle Eastern ancestry, supporting descent from ancient Hebrews. However, there are also shows European genetics mixture to intermarriage and assimilation. There is a European genetic also that also confirms this. We have critics, of course, that will say that that's not true, what I've just said, because this is an article that I'm reading. Some critics argue that Ashkenazi Jews are descendants from the Khazar Turk people converted to Judaism in the 8th century. So different people have different opinions in regards to this. I don't want to say much. I want us to dive right into the video. If you're watching this video for the first time, I'll most definitely ask you to subscribe to the channel, join our membership, and really get to see what we can offer you. Now, let's get into it. I'll be back and we'll talk about it.
And the reason that I bring this up now is because we are in a religious, political time where I just am seeing so much coming to light that as we speak forth the truth, there is pushback, but it needs to come forth in this time when these globalists are really pulling the strings, and so many people are blinded to the scriptures, blinded to historical truth, and they're led by their heartstrings, but it's not actually fact. One of those things, again, that people have been led for so many years is thinking that the Ashkenazi are in fact descendants of Shem. And we've discovered that the Ashkenazi are in fact the synagogue of Satan. They're the descendants of Japheth. They're Turkic Mongols from the Khazarian region that converted to Judaism in the 6th and 7th century. These are the things that we've discovered over the past few months. Those teachings came across in exposing the rotting stick of Israel and the synagogue of Satan that are in our archives. But then if I'm going to go forth and say, well, those that say that they are Jews but are in fact not, but are the synagogue of Satan, and the Ashkenazi are in fact not Jews, they are sons of Gomer, Japheth, they're not even Shemites. Many people have come to me and said, well, who are the real Jews then? Where are the Jews and what's going on? I mean, we understand that we're Joseph's multicolored coat and we're exiled into the nations. But if Yahweh is gathering the whole house of Israel, all 12 tribes, and the stranger that wants to graft in and join, then where are the tribes and what's going on? So I think it's really important to address this subject because, as I said, 92% of the people that say that they are Jews today are in fact Ashkenazi, sons of Gomer, so thereby are the synagogue of Satan, they who say they are Jews and are not. So who are the real Jews? That's the question that has been posed to me many times over the past months. And there's really two answers to that question. And I'm going to be thorough today because I need to be thorough, because when you speak about this, it's going to upset a lot of people. So we're going to have to take our time in the scripture. So bear with me. Two answers to that question. One, I already addressed in the rotting stick of false restoration and the synagogue of Satan teaching. And that is, who are the true Jews? Well, the Fehalim, which is a term for the so-called Palestinians, the migrant farmers that never left the land of Israel in 70 of the Common Era when the Romans came in. They still were attached to the land. They were called the Fehalim, or what we call today the so-called Palestinians, are in fact the descendants of the poor agricultural Jewish society that stayed in the land, yet they converted to Islam in the 6th and 7th centuries to avoid paying the Islamic jizya tax, because if they had done that, they would have lost their land. And they were attached to the land, so therefore they converted to Islam so that they could stay in the land, working the soil that their forefathers worked. This is recognized in 1918 by the historians David Ben-Gurion, who of course was the future Prime Minister of Israel back then, and Yitzhak Ben-Zvi, the future President of Israel. Both of them historians recognize this fact. Today, of course, it's buried in your history books. But what about the affluent, regal Jews that weren't connected to the land? Because we've addressed who the poor migrant workers are, the Fehalim. But not everyone in the tribe of Judah was connected to the land. There was a royal, regal class that were merchants that would travel throughout the empire and throughout Judea and throughout the Roman Empire as merchants. These were the regal, affluent Jews that weren't connected to the land, but they were engaged in trade and export. Who are they? And where did these royal nomadic Jews migrate to? That's the question that I want to address today. Because we're going to be looking at and tracking the migration patterns and thus identifying the regal merchant class of the house of Judah, as opposed to who we've already identified, the poor migrant working class, which were the Fehalim, today's Palestinians. I can't stand it when the globalists, the society that tries to enslave us, names us. I'm not a Caucasian, okay? Because a Caucasian is an Asian from the Caucasus Mountain region. The Russian steppes, Caucasian. I'm an Anglo-Saxon, which means a son of Isaac. So when they start to name you and you have to fill out these little boxes and the government hands you out these little and check what race you are, they're the ones telling you who you are. Don't buy it, because I'm not Caucasian. Who's Caucasian? The Ashkenazi Khazars, the Turkic Mongols from the Russian steppes, the Caucasus Mountains. They are Caucasians. We've already explained that. But I'm an Anglo-Saxon. I grew up in England. I'm a son of Isaac. That's what it means. You see, so I'm not going to check those boxes, because the New World Order, the globalists, trying to enslave us. But we serve an Elohim, and the first commandment is, I am Yahweh your Elohim, who delivered you from slavery. That's the key. This whole political system right now is all about slavery. The globalists are slavers. And we, as Israel, have got to understand who our Elohim is. He is the one who delivers his people from slavery. And today you are seeing more slavery by the politicians in this land, and it is truly, truly troubling. And I need to speak out on it because Yahweh is calling Israel back. He is calling his people back. But you've got to understand that slavery is what keeps you in Egypt. But when you can expose that, you can finally be set free and serve Yahweh, the Elohim of Israel. So we're going to look and track now the migration patterns of the regal merchant class of the house of Judah. Because now we can see that the Caucasians are not pure white races, but a mixture of Asians that lived on the Russian steppes. Asians in the Caucasus Mountains, right? Caucasians. Ashkenazi Khazars. The Ashkenazi, they who say they are Jews and are not, are Caucasians. Khazarian Mongols. That's the truth. And you can check that box. They who say they are Jews and are not. But we're going to look into history. Even when you look at, say, a country like Ethiopia in Africa, and you dig into the history of Menelik I and Menelik II, you'll understand that they were descendants of King Solomon. Menelik meaning from the Melech, from Melech, from the king, from the king. But what about Egypt? What about Mitzrayim, Egypt? What about Egypt? The pharaohs were black. They weren't white. They were black. Egypt is Mitzrayim, and it means burnt face or black. The ancients referred to their country as Kemet, which has been written in a variety of ways, Kemet, Kemit, Kem, Al-Kem, and it literally means the black land, or the land of the blacks, Mitzrayim. How did Moshe Rabbeinu go undetected for 40 years if he was a Caucasian in the land of the black faces? How did he go undetected for 40 years? How did Joseph's brothers not recognize him in the land of the black faces if he was a white man? Can you tell me that? Noah called his son Ham, in the Hebrew, Ham, Chet Mem Sofit, and it means hot. Kemet and Ham are the same words in the Hebrew, which represented the coloring of the people of Mitzrayim, Egypt. What happens if something stays hot for a long time? It burns and turns black, right? So you start to look at the scriptures and you start to see that we serve an Elohim that delivers people from slavery. And then I get sick and tired of what's been going on in the run-up to these elections. And coming from England, where I see things so different in this country because I come from outside and come into it. And I see all the fermentation. And it really troubles me. But the scripture and historical truth is what will set us free. Amen. But democracy is designed to enslave you. It was invented by the Greeks, and we understand from the scriptures who was sold to the Greeks. Joel speaks about that. In Exodus chapter 2, Shemot chapter 2, verse 19, Moshe was described as a Mitzri, which means a blackface, from the land of the blacks. They didn't say that he was a Mitzri Laban, a Mitri Laban. What was Laban? Remember Laban? He was an albino. An albino. He was white. An albino. And you can see that in Africa today. There are albinos. But he would have been described, if he was white, as a Mitri Laban. But he wasn't. Which would have meant he was an albino African. But he wasn't. Just like Yaakov's uncle was an albino. You see, the ancient Egyptians were a Kemetic people. They were black. In 1965, the former president of Egypt, Gamal Abdel Nasser, said he couldn't respect the present Jews in Israel because they left Israel black and they came back white. Because they were Caucasians when they returned, a Turkic Mongol Asians from the Caucasus Mountains, the Russian steppes. Song of Solomon, chapter 1, verse 5. I am black but comely, O ye daughters of Jerusalem, as the tents of Kedar, as the curtains of Solomon. I am black. The Hebrew word there is shachar ha-anya. It literally translates to, I am dark-skinned. Strong's number, and I don't use Strong's numbers very often, but there's going to be pushback. Strong's number 7838, shachar, from Strong's number 7835, dusky. So the word shachar means dusky. And if you look in the concise Oxford English Dictionary in the 10th edition, dusky means darkish in color, euphemistic of a person black and dark-skinned. And in the Old English Dictionary, it says tending to blackness. Song of Solomon's 5, verse 11. His head is as the most pure gold, meaning it's royal, it's regal, he's kingly, he's wearing a crown. His locks are curly and as black as raven. King Solomon, Melech Shlomo, was black. And only blacks have locks, not Caucasians, no matter what Rapunzel or what was the other one? Goldilocks would say, right? Look at Bathsheba in the Hebrew. Bet Tav Shin Bet Ayin, daughter of Sheba. She was the black daughter of Sheba, whose line goes back to Sheba, who was the son of Cush. Cush, who produced the Nilotic black races. Look at this, Bereshit, Genesis chapter 10, verse 6. And the sons of Ham, Cush and Mitzrayim and Put and Canaan, and the sons of Cush, Seba, Havilah, Savta, Ramah, Savtecha, and the sons of Ramah, Sheba and Dedan. And now you're going to say, well, if that's true of Solomon, what about Melech David? What about King David? We know that he was an Anglo because he had ruddy skin, right? Isn't that what the scripture says? Of course. He was Caucasian. No. 1 Samuel 17, verse 42. And when the Philistine looked out and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth, ruddy and of fair countenance. And then you can just move on. But I just don't want to move on. Because when you look at the Hebrew for ruddy is Adomi. Adomi, and it's spelled Aleph, Dalet, Mem, Nun, Yod. And it means reddish black, as in reddish black soil. The reddish black soil connected to the land. And if you don't believe that, Genesis chapter 4, verse 10, Bereshit 4:10, and he said, what have you done? The voice of your brother's dam, blood, cries out to me from the ground. So now here we've got the word play. Dam is blood. Adamah is ground. Adomi is ruddy. We're talking mahogany in color, reddish black. Malcolm X, what was his nickname? Red. Detroit Red. Why? Because he was ruddy in his appearance. He was called Detroit Red. He was mahogany ruddy in appearance. So we have to dig in further, because if King David was an Ashkenazi, white Jew with a reddish complexion, he would have been described as Laban, an albino, but he wasn't. So King David looked more like Malcolm X than he did King Henry VIII, right? But I mean, the DVDs we give our children, right? Oh my goodness, like you were saying, the Israelites have British accents, right? My goodness, it's outrageous. But look at ancient Egypt hieroglyphics, and they are ruddy. The Egyptians have got ruddy black skin, mahogany skin, reddish black complexions. You see, one of King Solomon's sons was later taken to Ethiopia by the Queen of Sheba, whose son had descendants reigning in Ethiopia until when? Until the Ashkenazi, those who say they are Jews and are not, came in and dethroned Haile Selassie in 1974. And that's where we get the Rasta movement, of course, from Ethiopia. Because then, after they dethroned Haile Selassie in 1974, then who did they bring in 1984 to get rid of any of those connected back to biblical Israel? Of course, they bring in Sir Bob Geldof a decade later with his Live Aid migration moving of people for the Ashkenazi communists, and moves everybody from the plateaus into the Live Aid feeding camps underneath Ashkenazi communist control. We already spoke about that earlier at Sukkot. Even the Ethiopian Jews, they're called the Falashas, meaning those that are black. Zephaniah chapter 3 verse 10. From beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, my worshippers, the daughters, my dispersed ones. That's the Queen of Sheba and her sons migrated and dispersed to Ethiopia. Lamentations chapter 4 verse 2. The precious sons of Zion are comparable to fine gold. Verse 8, their visage is blacker than coal. And the concise Oxford English Dictionary, the 10th edition, tells us that visage is a poetic literary of a person's face with reference to the form of their features. A person's facial expression is what? Blacker than coal. You start to connect the language and you start to see. Bereshit, Genesis chapter 9, verse 27. We have got the Ashkenazi sons of Japheth that have infiltrated into the land and are what? They've got the whole world convinced. The whole world convinced that they are sons of Shem. But look what it says in Bereshit chapter 9, verse 27. It actually tells you that Yahweh, who is omnipotent, it is his will because he has actually deceived them into doing this. They are so deceived into doing this. Look at Genesis 9, 27. Elohim will entice and deceive. The Hebrew word there is patah. Patah. He will deceive Japheth, Ashkenaz, the sons of Japheth, and he will dwell, that means Ashkenaz will dwell in the tents of the Shemites. Is that what's happening today? Has he deceived the Ashkenazi so much, those from the Russian steppes, the Caucasians, he's deceived them so much that they're actually dwelling in the place where the real Shemites should dwell? Genesis 9, verse 27. You see, Yahweh is the one that has deceived. He has enticed Japheth, Patah, Deceived, enticed. He's deceived and enticed the Ashkenazi Jews into believing that they're the Jews, and they've built the Zionist state of Israel today, which is occupying what? Our whole political platform. You don't know where the money is coming for Hillary Clinton? Where do you think it's coming from? The Ashkenazi slavers. That's where all this political money is coming from. And you don't think it's important for us to know this right before the elections, what's going on. Because they're going to try and enslave people even more. And we have to be aware of it. Because what's happened is the Ashkenazi are in fact occupying the tents of Shem, the real Shemites. Shem's not there. It's the Zionist occupiers that are there. Look at Job chapter 12, verse 18. The deceived and the deceiver are Yahweh's. Because some people are going to get all upset because you said, well, Yahweh deceived. He wouldn't deceive. Well, the scripture tells us that he does. Jeremiah chapter 20, verse 7. Yahweh, you deceive me, and I was deceived. Because there's a riddle, right? And we all know the riddle. I love the riddle. I love to do the riddle on my children. Out of the eater came forth meat, and out of the strong came forth sweet, right? What is sweeter than honey and what's stronger than a lion? And we know this from Shimshon, Samson, and Delilah. And she got hold of the riddle, did she not? Deceitfully. And Delilah made Shimshon, Samson, sleep upon her knees. And she called for a man. And she caused him to shave off the 7 locks off his head. And she began to afflict him. And his strength went from him. You see, Samson was the first Rasta. He was a Negro lion fighter, similar to the African Maasai tribe. Judges 14:5 and 16:19. You see, Samson tore a lion apart as he would a young goat. And as a Nazarite, he wore 7 dreadlocks. He was mahogany in body color, just like Malcolm X. And his visage was blacker than coal. He was a Negro. Lamentations 4, 7, and 8. And this is really hard for people to see in Scripture. Because predominantly it has been the Caucasians that have been in charge of the scriptures, right? For millennia. Lamentations 5:10. Our skin was black like an oven. Job 30 verse 30. My skin is black upon me and my bones are burned with heat. Deuteronomy 28. Deuteronomy 28 verse 68. And Yahweh shall bring you into Mitzrayim, Egypt again with ships. And the way of which I said to you, you shall see it no more again. And there you shall be sold to your enemies for slaves and female slaves, and no man shall buy you. And that is what happened to the regal class of the house of Judah. And I want to give you a brief history. I won't go into it too much, but I can't just make that statement because there'll be people that will push back. But I want to give you a brief history on slavery. I was just amazed, I got to tell you. I mean, when you come to America and you talk to people about slavery, you can talk to black people about slavery, white people about slavery, and they'll give you all this history on slavery, and it only goes back to the 16th and the 17th century. And you're like, don't they teach you the history of slavery? Why? Ask the bloody question. Why are they only teaching you the history of slavery as far back as the 16th and the 17th century? Why are they only going that far back? Because they don't want you to go farther back than that, because then you'll actually find out the truth. But from the 16th and 17th century, we'll teach you about slavery. You've got to go further back. And you've got to understand and question, why did they do this throughout the whole of America, in all the public schools? Why do they only go back as far as the 16th and the 17th century to talk about slavery? We've got to go further back than that. Because Islam designed infernal slavery. And then the Ashkenazi Khazars, those who say they are Jews and are not, are the ones that marketed it. And the regal Negro nomads, exiled from the kingdom of Judah, were the main recipients of it at the hands of the indigenous black Africans. Because you've got to understand, the regal class of the house of Judah came down from Israel, and they came into the land of the black Africans. And the black Africans resented the regal class of the house of Judah in their land because they had laws, they had customs, they had civility. And they were a regal class of Negro that came down into Africa. And later on, it was the Ashkenazi, the Islamic slave traders as well, that then worked together with the indigenous black Africans to enslave the regal house of Judah. This is what we've got to understand, but you've got to go back before the 16th century to understand the roots of it. So we're going to see, as we dig into this, where this slavery came from, because it was really a system that was very, very well crafted. There was Islamic masters, and there were white Ashkenazi Khazar ship owners. There were the buyers and the sellers. And they're not going to fill you in on all of this, but really you've got a 4-tier system. Number one, you have the Negro nomads that were exiled from the kingdom of Judah. Number two, you had indigenous black African hunters that resented the regal Negro nomads that had come into their territory with their own customs, with their own laws that were different and would not assimilate into their tribal culture. They were their own tribe. They were the regal house of Judah. And number three, you had Islamic trappers that worked with the indigenous black Africans to trap the regal Negro house of Judah. And then you had them sell them to the Ashkenazi ship merchants, along with many Portuguese and British Ashkenazi. You see, it's just like Al-Qaeda today. Or is it ISIS? Or is it ISIL? Or is it IS? I mean, right? Let's just change the name as much as possible to throw you all off so you really don't know what's going on. Let's keep switching the identity to hide the people. Why don't we just keep renaming you? Are you Negro? Oh, no, you're not Negro. No, you're colored. No, you're not colored. You're African American. And this is what they name you. The slavers name you this. Because I know a white guy who grew up in South Africa. And he now lives in America. He is an African American, and more African American than most. Do you see how African American is a misnomer? It's a misnomer. Don't check that box. It's a title given to blacks by democratic slavers. Okay? Let's be real. They want you to check the box, just like they want the Anglo-Saxon to check the Caucasian box. It's not true. So, again, we've got the 4-tier system. Number one, we have the regal Negro nomadic class that are exiled from the kingdom of Judah. They are their own royal tribe in Africa. Then, number 2, we have the native black African trackers. They're going to track them down. And number 3, we have the Islamic trappers, because between 650 of the Common Era and 1900 of the Common Era, 10 to 20 million people were enslaved by the Arab slave traders. Over 20 million enslaved Africans were delivered through the Trans-Sahara route to the Islamic world. Can you get your head around that? That's not even touching the Americas. Over 80 million more blacks died at the hands of Islam en route. And number 4, we have Ashkenazi, Khazar, Jewish ship merchants. And of course, the Portuguese and the British Ashkenazi were the main buyers. Islam and the Ashkenazi, those that say that they are Jews and are not, were the main sellers. Does that make sense? You've got to dig into this further. We have the 2 tiers right there. We have the Islamic trappers, and then we have the Ashkenazi ship merchants. You see, the Romans, they were globalist slavers. They were globalists then and now. They just migrated to Gaul, Ashkenazi, the sellers, and Britain, the British, of course, the buyers. German Jewry and British Jewry, where have they gone to? Well, they've descended upon Wall Street, upon Hollywood and Washington, D.C., as we see it right now, just to fuel this cataclysmic final war of globalism, which is none other than renaming colonialism. And this is the world that you and I live in. And I'm so sick and tired of these talking heads when it comes to the election time, trying to enslave everybody and cause racial division to try and get the votes. When ultimately, if Israel would just wake up to who's enslaving us, regardless of our skin color, he says what? I am Yahweh your Elohim that delivered you from slavery. We all need to get out from underneath this slavery system, and we need to come together as Joseph's multicolored Melchizedek cloak. But we've got to help identify who are our Jewish brothers and where are our Jewish brothers as the whole house of Israel comes together. Because Islam and the Slavic regions, I mean, where do we get these names? Yugoslavia, of course, Czechoslovakia, Slovakia. These were all regions of bestial slavery that eventually arrived on the African continent. These were areas where Islam invented infernal slavery up in those Slavic regions that then eventually arrived on the African continent. And the black regal Negroes of Judah were the recipients of it. But not only black Judah, but Europeans were even kidnapped by the Arabs and the Ashkenazi traders during the war or peace periods in the medieval times. So, just to recap before we go further, because I don't want you to be confused, because it's of utmost importance. The real Shemites, the Fehalim, the rural farmers, found in the land of Israel at the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century. What we call today the Palestinian Christians, Palestinians, and other anti-Zionist, non-Ashkenazi, Torah-keeping Jews worldwide, just like the Yemenite Jews. And 2, the real Shemites, the royal, regal, Negro nomads, exiled from the kingdom of Judah, African Shemites who were taken away in slave ships, Deuteronomy 28, verse 68, by the synagogue of Satan, the Caucasian, white Ashkenazi Jews in the 17th and 18th century. Because Ashkenazi slaving, the history of it is outrageous. Let me read something to you. This is from the Ashkenazi Jew. He's a scholar, Jonathan Shoresh, and he says this. Jewish merchants routinely possessed enormous numbers of slaves temporarily before selling them off. If a slave auction fell on a Jewish holiday, it was postponed due to a lack of buyers and sellers. The Jews of Suriname gave their slave plantations Hebrew names, such as Machanaim, Nachamu, and Goshen. Rabbi Herbert Bloom adds that the slave trade was one of the most important Jewish activities. One of the most important Ashkenazi Jewish activities. In 1694, Jews owned 9,000 regal African nomadic Jews from the house of Judah. In 1694, they owned 9,000.
Hello guys, welcome back to the channel. I realized that I had this burning question that I would like to know. Can someone be white? Because there is a point that he talks about this. Can someone be white and still not a Caucasian? Right? And it forces me to look, who then Caucasian? Who is a Caucasian person? What is a Caucasian? Because for me, as an African who is trying to learn all this, I'm seeing, okay, he's white, right? But he's claiming that he's not Caucasian. So I'm here to find the truth. Who is really Caucasian? Now, the term Caucasian historically refers to a broad group of people originally classified as part of Caucasoid race. It includes European, Middle Easterns, and some Central and South Asian population, right? Now, Ashkenazi Jews are often categorized as Caucasians in racial terms, built but distinctly cultural and ethnically. Who is white but not Caucasian? Now, white is a social construct. That's the first thing. Used in Western societies to describe light-skinned group of people of European descent. It is possible to have a light skin and not fit into Western and ideas of whiteness. That's interesting, especially if culturally or ethnic identities override the racial perception. Yeah, I mean, it really makes sense. Okay. Now, there are perspectives that people give about why is this question matters, like who are really true Jews, right? This question has been asked, has been debated by different people, and everyone is giving their opinion in regards to this. Now, first, why does this question matters? The question of true Jews, because as per se, today you'll hear a profession talking about who they believe are Jews. They'll give their own opinion, they'll give their own stats, they'll give their own history. If you ask another person, they'll also give you their own opinion, they'll also give you their own belief, they'll also give you their own stats, right? Because this is what they believe. Now, this debate constitute of the true Jews. It rises from three things. The first one is religious identity. Questions of adherence to Torah laws and conversion legitimacy. 2 is ethnic identity, the impact of diaspora, intermarriages, and genetic diversity. These are the things that comes into play. The third one is geopolitical issues, right? Now, competing claims to Jewish identity influences political narrative, particularly regarding Israel, Palestine, right? Now, what are perspectives beyond genetics? Somebody will ask themselves, what are the perspectives beyond genetics? Biblical interpretation. Yeah, many argue that being a true Jew is more about faith and covenant with God than race or ethnicity. I would like to know what people say or what people feel about this. I really want to know. The second one is cultural evolution. Judaism as a religion has historically incorporated converts as diverse practices, reinforcing its inclusivity. That makes sense. The third thing is contemporary relevance. Contemporary relevance, right? Critics argues that Ashkenazi dominance often stems from broader issues of inequality and representation within the global Jewish community. There's another question that I would love to ask you. Why so much confusion with this topic, around this topic? I would like to know. Let me know. Why is there so many confusion, right, in regards to this topic? Because people are confused. Some people believe that they're Jews and they're not, right? I'd like to know. Now, I'm going to be looking at why. Because if there's a topic that I know that a lot of people are confused about, is this topic, right? I'm trying to find out why is so many confusion. Why are there so many confusion around this topic? People are confusing themselves, and there's a lot of information that goes on and confuses people. Now, I'm trying to look at why. Right. And the article that I'm trying to look at says that confusion surrounding the topic of who are true Jews stems from complex interplay of historical, that's first, theological, second, cultural, third, political, another one, and racial factors. And it gives reasons as to why this is misunderstood by the vast majority of people. Now, first, historical diaspora and cultural diversity. First, we're talking about the Jewish diaspora. The destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE and subsequent Roman expulsion dispersed Jews worldwide, leading to the development of distinct Jewish community. First is Ashkenazi, two is Sephardic, third is Mizrahi, fourth is Beta Israel, right? That we are having all these race of people who call themselves Jews. I've talked about Ashkenazi, one of the most people who are in Europe, and they claim that they are the real Jews, yet they ain't, right? Two is Sephardic, three is Mizra, and four is Beta Israel. Now, over time, these groups develop unique languages, traditions, and physical characteristics due to intermarriages and assimilation, making the global Jewish identity diverse and complex. Where did confusion come from in regards to Jewish diaspora? This diversity leads to debates about whether the Jewish identity is defined by religion, ethnicity, or both. The second thing that I would like to know, competing claims to Jewish identity, because there are still competing claims in regards to Jewish identity. First is religious interpretation. Some people argue that the Jewish is strictly religious and defined by the adherence to Jewish law, in bracket halakha. Others focus on ancestry, particularly maternal lineage, as outlined in the Jewish tradition. We also have non-religious Jews or converts often face skepticism about the authenticity of the Jewish identity. I like to talk about the Khazar theory controversy as one of my other talking point. Now, the idea that the Ashkenazi Jews descended from the Khazar converts fuels doubt among some people about whether the Ashkenazi are truly linked to the biblical Israelites. For me, I'll say no, because I've seen different people argue against this, providing evidence, arguing against this. And one evidence of argument I usually give, there are no curses which are in Deuteronomy 28. The Khazars doesn't have any curses that were given unto them. Right now, whether Ashkenazis are true linked to the biblical Israelites. Now, despite being largely discredited by the genetics, theory persists due to its political and racial undertones. Now, the third source of confusion is political implications. Israel-Palestine conflict. I don't like to talk about this. Debates over Jewish identity are deeply entangled within Zionism and establishment of the State of Israel in 1948. Some questions whether the Ashkenazi Jews, many whom played key roles in founding Israel, have legitimate ancestral claims to the land, as opposed to the Sephardic or Mizrahi Jew who remained in the Middle East. Right. Supremacy debates within Judaism. Criticism exists over Ashkenazi Jews dominating Jewish culture, religion, political institution, sidelining other Jewish groups like Ethiopian Jews, Beta or Yemen Jews, right? The fourth one that I would like to talk about is racial reconstruction and Europeanization, white Jews and identity politics. Ashkenazi Jews, particularly in the West, are often perceived as white, which leads to debates about the oppression versus privilege, which is true. And even the Bible could use to argue against this. Now, anti Semitic rhetoric frequently paints Jews as both racial outsiders and part of the elite power structure, creating contradictions in their religious categorization, right? Because when we look at people claiming or arguing against being anti Semitic and giving anti Semitic rhetoric, right, to create a racial outsiders and part of an elite power structure, creating contradictions in the racial categorization. Now, another thing under racial constructions and Europeanization, biblical versus modern representation. There's still an argument in regards to that. Some African and Afrocentric movements argue that ancient Hebrews were black, challenging European depictions of Jews and highlighting a history of erasure of African contribution to Jewish history. And that's true, right? Now, the fifth thing that I would like to talk about why there is a confusion within this line is the role of anti-Semitism. First, historical targeting. Jews have been scapegoated and marginalized throughout the history, leading to widespread of misinformation and stereotype. Claims of false Jews sometimes used in anti-Semitic conspiracies, further modifying the discussion. Divide and conquer dynamics. Now, powerful systems often exploit divisions within the oppressed groups, right? Fostering debates like these weaken collective solidarity. We could talk about DNA and genetic evidence. Still, there is confusion within that line. We could talk about misinformation and political agendas, still in line with that line, right? So we could talk more and more and more and more about this topic. But I hope that from the presenter that you've watched to, we'll get to learn and see more about it. This is a presenter, Jinduk Stories, and I'm hoping to see you in my next video. But until then, peace, love, and harmony. Salute, stay blessed, stay and get to know the truth.